What's going on, Bottom Line viewers? It's Mitch here of the Bottom Line View with your NFL Week 12 Stardom and Situm for your fantasy football teams. I'm going to give you 5 starts and 5 sits for the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions here in week number 12. Let's start off with the quarterback position. And my biggest start this week, and he can really be found in a few leagues still, is Andy Dalton versus the Cleveland Browns. Dalton balled out versus the Cleveland Browns the first time they played. He scored 4 touchdowns in that first game. In this game, I think it sets up very much the same way. I think the Bengals will really be able to pass the ball against this defense. A.J. Green should have a nice game, and that means Andy Dalton should also have a nice game. And in a game that is also expected to be a semi-blowout in this one. Jared Goff versus New Orleans. Now, for some reason, a lot of people have Jared Goff as a sit this week. I don't really see the reasoning. Jared Goff is at home. He's playing a defense that isn't exactly great. Now, they're not bad, but they're not great, and they haven't played well against good offenses and good quarterbacks. You think to the Saints, last week, they gave up a ton of yards to the Redskins, and if you think about the Redskins, who was their offensive coordinator last year? Yeah, it was Sean McVay. He's now the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams. He knows the systems in Washington very well. I think he'll be able to replicate that with Jared Goff and the Los Angeles offense. Yes, Jared Goff does not have his top target, Robert Woods, but he still has Sammy Watkins, still has Cooper Kupp, still has a couple tight ends, and Todd Gurley. He's playing New Orleans, who's without their top 2 cornerbacks, and they lost Okafor. So I'm looking at a Saints defense that is kind of vulnerable in this matchup, especially on the road, and I think that this game should end up being somewhat of a shootout. So I'm going with Jared Goff as a start this week to rebound after a tough performance against a good Vikings defense. Matt Ryan versus Tampa Bay. Matt Ryan roasted Tampa Bay and has roasted Tampa Bay for 20-plus points in each of his last 4 meetings in Atlanta. Matt Ryan has played pretty well at home this season and has really been on a little bit of a roll here as of late. Atlanta's offense has been playing a lot better. They're a lot more balanced. They have a nice running attack, passing attack, and he had a nice game against Seattle in Seattle last week. Now, against Tampa Bay is one of the top 5 worst defenses against the pass in the NFL. I expect that trend to continue against Matt Ryan, and I think Atlanta will be able to put up some points at home against Tampa Bay, where they typically put up a ton in Atlanta. Ben Roethlisberger versus Green Bay. Now, Green Bay has allowed a top 11 quarterback in 3 of their past 6 games, so that's basically a quarterback won 3 of their past 6 games, and Ben Roethlisberger has been awesome at home. He had a really good game against the Titans. Now, I've been talking about Big Ben in kind of a negative fashion this entire season because he hasn't been having his best year. But with Big Ben against Green Bay, a defense that is vulnerable, especially against the pass, a game that is shaping up to be a blowout. Vegas has this as Steelers minus 14 points going into the game. Ben Roethlisberger should have a very nice day. Antonio Brown is on fire. Juju Smith-Schuster is looking good. This offense is starting to get their roll on, and I really look at this matchup, and I just don't see it being very close. You look what Ben did against the Titans last week, a defense that's very similar to Green Bay. I think Big Ben will have another nice one this week in week number 12. Jacoby Brissett versus the Tennessee Titans. The Titans have allowed the 3rd most passing touchdowns this season. Jacoby had a pretty good game against the Titans the first time around, and this time it will be at home. The Colts have played a lot better at home. T.Y. Hilton has had his best games at home, and I expect him to have another nice one here with Jacoby Brissett. All his rushing touchdowns have actually come at home as well. And I think this game, as indicated by the spread, 3.5 points by Vegas, this game should be a close game, which should come down to the wire, with the Colts probably passing the football near the end to get you some extra fantasy points. I like Jacoby against a weak secondary against Tennessee. The quarterback sits this week. I have Josh McCown versus Carolina. The Panthers rank 4th versus the pass and are actually one of the top 5 defenses in the NFL this season. I just don't like it. You know, McCown is at home. Carolina is a tough team, and I really expect Carolina to shut down the running attack of the Jets, forcing Josh McCown in some awkward 3rd down situations and just some bad situations overall. I think the Panthers will really take it to the Jets in this game, and I don't see how McCown is going to have a nice one in this game. Blaine Gabbert versus Jacksonville. The Jaguars have the best pass defense in the NFL this season. Gabbert, although I said was a start last week and he played the Texans, who were not a very good pass defense, this is the exact opposite of the spectrum. The Jaguars are the best in the NFL. They have one of the best pass rushes coupled with one of the best secondaries, and really only one receiver to stop in Larry Fitzgerald. I think Gabbert has a really tough time against the Jaguars this week. Derek Carr versus Denver. In his past 5 meetings versus the Broncos, Carr is averaging just 173.8 yards. That's not very good if you ask me. The Broncos defense is still pretty good, even though they've had a couple of on and off games down the stretch the last couple of games. But Derek Carr, he's just looked terrible. He looked terrible against the Patriots last week. Their offense is really out of rhythm. They've having to change coaches. Their team is just in shambles. Jack Del Rio is on the hot seat. Amari Cooper is invisible. So I just don't see Derek Carr having a good game here. They might still win the game, but it would be in a defensive game. I don't see Derek Carr, having big numbers against the Broncos, especially because he really doesn't put up big numbers against the Broncos, even at home. Ryan Fitzpatrick versus Atlanta. The Falcons have allowed only 4 games over 20 points to quarterbacks this year, and 3 of them were to Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, and Russell Wilson. Ryan Fitzpatrick is none of those 3 guys, and I expect this one to be a tough one for Tampa Bay. Going to Atlanta, where they typically play better, Atlanta should be able to get out to an early lead, which forces Fitzpatrick into some tough situations against a good pass rush and good pass defense. Fitzpatrick is going to have a tough one here, and his run game is really non-existent, so that doesn't help him much. Matt Moore versus New England. The Patriots haven't given up more than 17 points in the last 6 games. So the Patriots are playing a ton better than when they were playing terribly the first 4 to 5 games of the season. Matt Moore is filling in for Jay Cutler. Yes, he might be just as good, if not better, to be honest, but the Patriots defense, like I said, is on a roll, and they're not really going to give up much to this Dolphins offense. This Dolphins offense has been one of the worst in the league all season long. It's just not looking good for Matt Moore. And their run game, again, like Fitzpatrick, is non-existent. Even with Jay Ajayi there, they traded him. Now they're trying to put Williams and Drake in there. Their run game has been totally inconsistent. And without any balance against the Patriots, Belichick's just going to take away what you do best. And that's probably Jarvis Landry in this passing attack. My running back starts are Carlos Hyde versus Seattle. Hyde has rushed for a combined 227 yards and scored 2 touchdowns in his last 2 games against the Seahawks. It's really impressive numbers, including a 5.1 yards per carry. Hyde is a start this week. Now, the reason I have him as a start is because I just want people to be aware that he has been this good against Seattle. Seattle is typically a sit candidate for a lot of running backs, but Hyde and this Kyle Shanahan scheme has been really expertly applied against the Seahawks, and I think it will be in this game as well. It will be the only chance the 49ers really have of slowing down Russell Wilson on the opposite side of the ball, and it will be the only way that they can really move the ball. The 49ers are not a very good, talented team, but Carlos Hyde is definitely one of, if not their best player, and he'll definitely be given all the chances to work his magic against the Seahawks. Danny Woodhead versus the Houston Texans. Danny Woodhead has only played 13 snaps last week, but he actually touched the ball on 6 of those snaps. So Danny Woodhead, despite only playing 13 snaps, was getting a lot of the target share. And I think that Danny Woodhead will be playing a lot more this week because the Houston Texans are one of the best run defenses in the entire league. They actually rank in the top 3 at allowing running back points. So that means that they're very good against running backs in terms of running the football. But in terms of passing the football, I think Danny Woodhead will be able to take advantage of some of those linebackers in coverage. I think Joe Flacco really likes this guy, and I think he'll get a lot of the ball in this game because I think Danny Woodhead will see a lot more snaps. He's had 1 week to really adjust to come back, but this week I think he'll be full force against the Texans. Dion Lewis versus Miami. Lewis comes into this game with at least 14 touches, 4 games in a row, so he really has a stranglehold on this running back. On these carries and on these attempts and on these touches for the New England Patriots. Lewis is the man there, and he is definitely their best back. There's no doubt about it if you've watched them over the past few weeks. Against Miami, Miami is one of the worst tackling teams in the NFL. They can't tackle guys in space, and they've been really poor against running backs over the last 4 to 5 weeks. I expect Lewis to have a nice game on the ground, as well as a couple of nice catches, maybe even a couple touchdowns in this one against Miami, in a game that's expected to be the biggest blowout of the week. The Patriots are minus 17 at home. Tevin Coleman versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has allowed a running back to score or gain 100 total yards in 5 of their past 7 games. Coleman should have another nice one in this game. He didn't have an overall great game in terms of yardage against the Seahawks, but this week, he had a touchdown last week. This week, he's playing Tampa Bay, who, like I said, one of the worst defenses in the NFL. No Devontae Freeman. Atlanta should be moving the ball at will, and I expect him to get a lot of goal line touches, maybe multiple touchdowns. He's going to have catches. He's going to have a lot of attempts on the ground, even in a game that could be a blowout. So Coleman could be closing this one out late. I think Coleman's going to have a big game and maybe his biggest game of the season in this one against Tampa Bay. Kareem Hunt versus Buffalo. Now, the Bills have been terrible against the run over the past few weeks since trading Marcel Darius. They've allowed 5.4 yards per carry, 10 touchdowns, and 171 fantasy points, which is all the most in the NFL. That's not looking good for Buffalo against Kareem Hunt, who has slowed down as of late, but I really think that's mostly to do with the Chiefs' plan of attack. They've been passing the ball too much. I think they get back to some of that running attack at home against the Bills, and I think Kareem Hunt has his best game in weeks. My running back sits, I have Doug Martin versus Atlanta. The Falcons have allowed just 1 rushing touchdown at home this entire season. Doug Martin has not been playing well this entire season, really, and a lot of that has to do with the Tampa Bay offensive line not opening up holes for him. I expect this game to get out of hand a little early, and I think Atlanta will have the stranglehold on this game, meaning that Tampa Bay will be having to pass the ball more than running the ball, and I just don't see the game script faring well for Doug Martin. Marshawn Lynch versus Denver. The Denver defense has allowed just 77 rushing yards and 4 rushing scores to opposing runners this year. Lynch has not been good, although he was good in a yards per carry basis last week. The game script just got out of hand against the Patriots, and that was kind of unlucky. But against the Broncos, I don't think it will get out of hand game script-wise. I think it will get out of hand in terms of Denver stuffing the run. I don't see Marshawn Lynch having a good game here. He hasn't shown a ton of explosion, and his ability is really diminished. So I would sit Marshawn Lynch against a good Broncos run defense. Jordan Howard versus Philadelphia. Now, this is a little bold. Jordan Howard is a weekly start for me typically, but against the Eagles, they have the best run defense in the NFL. I expect this game to be somewhat of a blowout for the Eagles, at home for the Eagles, and I expect Trubisky to have a lot of action in this one. I don't really expect Howard to have a ton of carries. I think this is going to be more of a Tariq Cohen. He's going to be catching the ball more out of the backfield and other than really running the ball, which is what Jordan Howard does best. Howard is a great running back, and the Bears have a good rushing attack. But against an Eagles defense that is really, really strong against the run, I just don't see this being Howard's best of weeks. So if you have a better guy on the bench with a prime matchup, then start him. Kenyon Drake versus New England. The whole Drake and Williams situation is kind of hard to really follow in Miami. Miami is not very good at running the ball this year, and Williams has really been out-snapping Kenyon Drake. So if you really need to start one of them, which I hope to God you don't, Damian Williams would be the one because he is more of the pass-catching back, and this game should be out of hand pretty quickly. Kenyon Drake won't see a lot of the football on the ground because they'll be passing to get back in this game. So I expect Drake, who has not fared well in the past couple of weeks, to not have a ton of production against the New England Patriots. Adrian Peterson versus Jacksonville. Peterson is averaging just 1.57 yards per rush in his past 2 games. That's absolutely terrible. Jacksonville will be forcing the Cardinals to get out of running the football. The Cardinals will be forcing the Cardinals to pass the ball. And I just think that the Jaguars, their corners are going to be able to take away those receivers, which really allows the Jacksonville Jaguars to put multiple people in the box to stuff Adrian Peterson early on in this game. I think Jacksonville will slowly chip away at the Cardinals, end up winning this game, and really taking Peterson and their entire offense out of it early on. My wide receiver starts this week. I have T.Y. Hilton versus Tennessee. I've been pretty accurate in terms of when to start and sit T.Y. Hilton. This week, I think this is a start. The Titans secondary allows the 5th most points to opposing receivers this season. Also, T.Y. Hilton has gone off multiple times at home this year with Jacoby Brissett. As I said, Brissett's a start. Hilton's a start for me as well against a Titans secondary that absolutely got destroyed by Antonio Brown last week. Jarvis Landry versus New England. Landry is a safe start this week, and I wouldn't sit him at all. Landry has actually been really, really good against New England, and in a game where it could be over early, in a game where New England could be giving up garbage yards, I think Landry could have a big game. Landry has had at least 6 catches for 71 yards in his past 5 games against the Patriots, including 3 games over 100 yards. So Landry is really that matchup that New England doesn't have an answer for in the slot. Gilmore and Butler primarily play on the outside and should be on Stills and Parker respectively, so Landry should have the best matchup of the 3 receivers. Mohamed Sanu versus Tampa Bay. Sanu has scored in 3 of his past 4 games. He has been on a roll in terms of that red zone target for Atlanta, and I think against the Tampa Bay secondary, that's one of the worst in the league. Like I said, Matt Ryan's a start, Tevin Coleman's a start. I'm starting all the Falcons this week against the Tampa Bay defense that I expect can't handle this Atlanta offense, who's starting to get a handle of things late in the season. Cooper Kupp versus New Orleans. I like both Cooper Kupp and Sammy Watkins this week, but I'm going to say that Cooper Kupp's my start. There's no Robert Woods. The Saints, of course, are without their 2 top corners this week, and the Saints' weakness is really, even with those corners, versus the pass, specifically versus slot receivers, which they've struggled with all year long. I think Cooper Kupp has a nice game here, especially in PPR. He should have multiple targets, and I think this is going to be the go-to guy for Jared Goff this week. Corey Davis versus Indianapolis. He's had 17 targets in the past 2 games. He's facing a terrible pass defense, and he's really going to be the number 1 target because Rashard Matthews is not playing in this game. This is a chance for Corey Davis to break out against the Colts. Wide receiver sits. Larry Fitzgerald versus Jacksonville. In the past 4 games, the Jags have allowed a total of 9 receptions to receivers. That's absolutely ridiculous. Larry Fitzgerald is going to have a tough time. Yes, he's probably still going to have the best game of all Cardinals receivers, but if you have any sort of depth on your fantasy lineup, definitely put someone else in against the Jags. I just don't see a ton of upside with Fitzgerald this week. Jordy Nelson versus Pittsburgh. He's scored a combined 19.2 PPR points in his past 4 games. That is not Jordy Nelson-like. He is not putting up any sort of numbers that you can rely on. And against a Pittsburgh defense that is pretty good, especially at home. I don't expect Jordy Nelson to have a good game here and bounce back in any sort of fashion. Amari Cooper versus Denver. Cooper has basically been the invisible man this season, but especially against Denver. In 5 meetings, he's averaged a mere 3.2 receptions versus Denver. That's terrible. Chris Harris will be on him all day long, and I think Derek Carr is going to struggle. I think his Oakland offense is going to struggle, and I think Denver is going to really lay him on him defensively. Devontae Parker versus New England. Parker has scored 15 fantasy points combined in his past 3 games. That's not very good. He's going to have Stephon Gilmore, who in my opinion is the most consistent, best corner for New England, on him. And I think that New England is really going to just take away the deep shots for Devontae Parker. Matt Moore isn't that sort of quarterback. It was more Jay Cutler. Matt Moore is actually seeming to like Kenny Stills and Jarvis Landry, of course, over Devontae Parker. So he's 3rd in targets. He's probably going to be matched up with the best corner. And this game should be a blowout. So I don't expect Devontae Parker to have a huge fantasy day in this one. Marquise Lee versus Arizona. Marquise Lee will be matched up with Patrick Peterson. I expect the Jaguars to avoid that matchup and run the football against the Cardinals and maybe go to a couple of other targets that have really been shining these recent weeks for the Jaguars. Marquise Lee's been solid for you this year, but against the Patrick Peterson, who's really done a lot better against a lot, he's done a lot versus a lot better competition. I think Lee is probably a sit for you this week. And my tight end starts, I have Jack Doyle versus Tennessee. He had a combined 31 catches and 2 touchdowns in his previous 2 games before last week. I think he bounces back here because one of his big games this season was against the Titans. He had a touchdown over 50 yards. So I think Jack Doyle is going to get back involved in this Colts offense this week. Jared Cook versus Denver. The Broncos have allowed an average of 90 yards and 19.5 PPR points per game to the opposing tight ends on the road this year. Jared Cook has been one of the more consistent players for the Oakland Raiders. He did not have a great game against the Patriots, but I feel like that was more of the Patriots scheming him out of the game than anything. I think Jared Cook has a very nice game against the Broncos here, in a game where they're going to have to go to him because their wide receivers are going to be locked down and their running game isn't going to really be doing anything for them. Tyler Kroft versus Cleveland. 6 catches, 68 yards, 2 touchdowns in his first game against Cleveland. I don't really expect him to replicate that, but I think he'll have another nice game against the Browns. The Browns are one of the 3 worst teams against tight ends this year. And my last start is the return of Gregory Olsen. Greg Olsen is back. He plays the New York Jets, and the Jets defense has allowed the 4th most touchdowns to tight ends this season. I think Greg Olsen will have an immediate impact for the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers are a scary team going down the stretch. I'd really be aware of them, and I'd really like to own a lot of their fantasy players going down the stretch. So Greg Olsen is a start for me, as well as Cameron Newton. Those are my starts and sits for week number 12 of the NFL season. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure you hit that subscribe button, as we'll have more stardom and sit-ems as we get towards the fantasy playoffs. It's coming up the next 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your league schedule. I'm really excited for it. I have a ton of teams in the playoffs, so I'm really excited. Hopefully I can win a couple of my leagues, and I hope you guys can too. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Like the video, subscribe, and peace out.